All right, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I thank you very much that you being able to attending our discussions is very interesting discussing. I hope everybody will enjoy it because we are in not in good situation right now with the pandemic. Everybody's staying home. We try to bring you to another ambience, which is talking about the movie, yeah, because I see that Yaron are willing to give us some information about how movie in Israel. So that's why I asked Yaron to do this kind of discussions. Okay, as everybody knows that I am the one who organized these discussions. Yeah, my name is Sapri. I hope you know me. Okay, this discussion will be moderated by Mr. Leo Epafras, who's been studying Judaism and Islam, relation between Judaism and Islam, and he's also Middle Eastern observer. As I know that he has many journal researchers in talking about the Middle East. And it is such a pleasure to have all of participants. I keep, people keep coming now, and I accept them. Thank you very much. Special thanks for, of course, for Mr. Professor Yaron that being able to share his knowledge with us today, and thanks many of my friends that you are able to join the discussion tonight. And okay, before we start, I would like to point out the important thing so we can run this discussion nicely and smooth. Q&A only allow you after our panel explain his presentation. After Yaron will explain everything, we'll be open the questions and answers. All right, Gilang coming. We win. Thank you, Ibu Wiwin. He's a lecturer in University of Indonesia. Gilang also. Welcome, Gilang. Okay, so, and then we will take the first 3 questions from participants and let the panel answer the questions. And the question will be posted in the chatting room. And then I will transfer the question to Mr. Leo. And for your notice, this discussion are recorded. For who want the copy, please send me the email and I will share you as soon as possible. Probably by tomorrow, the copy will be ready. So we can share to you in your email or whatever. So now, please, Leo, you can lead the discussion right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Mas. But Mr. Sapri, welcome all you for in this conversation. It's very, very interesting conversation, and especially if we frame it within the Indonesian context, because we're aware of that that there's a certain perception of Indonesian toward the Jews and Israel. And good evening for Indonesians, and good morning for Professor Yaron Peleg. We are very, very honored that you are willing to join us and discuss important issues with us, mostly Indonesian, even though we also sending invitation to other non-Indonesians. But especially for Indonesian, this is very, very timely because during pandemics, we have an opportunity to learn more. And especially, I want to frame this discussion within the context of, again, about the perception of Indonesian toward Jews and Israelis, because that's part of my research for some years. That in general, that we have a very negative perception toward Jews and Israelis because of many, many issues, but mostly people argued because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But coming back from my research is not only because of Israeli-Palestinian, but also because other things, because of the struggle between the Western colonialism and colonized the people, and also religious narrative also take important part among the people to understand these issues. And stemming from that, as far as my understanding, many Indonesians perceive Jews, Israels within the context of religious perception or religious narrative. That's why it is truly timely for us to discuss Israeli movies and understand Israeli movies within the religious perception, and how Israeli movies moving toward more religious or taking religious issue into the mainstream. So, but furthermore, in fact, Indonesia is not really absent from Israelis movies, because we have some movies that's touching upon Israel issues. Of course, first of all, is we aware of the famous actresses like Gal Gadot, Natalie Portman, and other names that not only they are Hollywood actresses, but also they are at the same time Israelis citizens. So, and also movies. We have several movies that touch upon the issue of Israel, directly or indirectly. For example, Munich, or You Don't Mess with Zohan, and something like that. Of course, Indonesian government several times banned Jewish movie, regardless Israeli or Jewish American Jewish movies. But since 2000, when there's a technology called VCD, video CD and DVD, and we have DVD rent shops everywhere throughout the country, then Indonesians have a much more diverse options of watching movies, including Israeli movie. So I found a Jewish movie and Israeli movie. I found Schindler's List, even though it's banned, but we can easily get from the rent shop of the DVD version of that, or other Israeli movie. For example, the Natalie Portman movie, A Tale of Love and Darkness, something like that, and something like that. So, okay, without further, I just want to point out the importance of this issue, because now we have a chance, we have a space, not only discussing political issue, conflict, ideological, religious issue, but we have a chance to speak about more than that. We can move on, talking about Jews and Indonesians, move on from only from the perspective of hatred, perspective of conflict. Now we can have a more meaningful understanding about the two countries, and especially about Israel. Hopefully, this is only the first step for us, and we have a chance to, in the future, more discussion, more meaningful discussion about our stories, dreams, and so on. Okay, now we have Professor Peleg here to illuminate us all about Israeli movies, and hopefully also discuss some aspect of Jewish issues. And Professor Peleg is professor from Cambridge University. He focusing on modern Hebrew literature and Israel studies, and also modern literature and film studies. That's why he's a very important person to talk about Israel movies for us. He came from also have one time in working in George Washington University, then moved to the United Kingdom, and up until now working in Cambridge University. He was graduated from Brandeis University in 2000. And yeah, okay, I think that's all to frame our discussion today, and hopefully it's truly help us to understand more about Israel and Jewish issue. Without further ado, please, Professor Yaron Peleg, to discuss and to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank very much the hosts, Sapri and Leo, for inviting me to take part in this webinar. And I hope I can help you understand a few things about Israel, and especially some of its relationship to Judaism. And I want to open. What I'm going to do, I was asked by my hosts to speak for a few minutes about the issue, introduce the book, and perhaps also show you some film clips that will illustrate some of what I want to say. But before I do this, I wanted to say, I wanted to comment on some of the things Leo said before as an introduction, and that is the perception of Israel in Asia. I visited China and Japan last year, and also taught at the university at two universities in China, and was exposed in the last few years to the perception of Israel in some places in Asia, in China, in Japan, and now a little bit in Indonesia. And one of the most striking things for me as an Israeli is the connection that is made, especially in Asia, between Israel and the Jewish religion or Judaism. This is very interesting in a historical perspective, because one of the things that Zionists tried to do at the beginning of the 20th century is to separate Jews from Judaism. It sounds very strange, but this is, in fact, one of the most interesting aspects, historically, culturally speaking, when we speak about Zionism. And I think one of the ways to think about it is as a cultural revolution. What the Zionists tried to do at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, when they were constructing a new Jewish state or a new Jewish community in Palestine, is to sever the connections between Jews and Judaism. The reasons for that, I think many people know, and I won't go into them. It had a lot to do with the failure of Jews in Europe to become part of European society, and the rejection that they felt at the time, which led them to try and create their own community in Palestine that will be a place for Jews to come to and develop independently. However, one of the things that they try to do is to construct, to create, to build for the first time in Jewish history, really, a secular Jewish culture. And there is, I think, some kind of a paradox in this term, secular and Jewish. And that has to do, I think, with a lot with the concept of Judaism or Jewishness, which is a very slippery or very problematic term to define, because unlike of, for example, Christianity, which is very often the religion against which Jews are, or to which Judaism is compared. Unlike Christianity, Judaism is not just a religion, or it's sort of some people spoke about it as a civilization, as a culture. It's very hard to define because, for example, if you look at me personally, although I was born in Israel and I was born to Jewish parents, I am not a religious person. I don't go to synagogue and I don't observe religious rituals. But for everybody in the world, I am considered a Jewish person. So, but I am a secular person. So what does it mean? So all of these things are really very complex, very complicated. And what Zionists try to do at the beginning of the 20th century is to create this kind of identity of a secular Jewish culture at the time it was called Palestine. Later on, it was given the name of the State of Israel. And of course, we know about the conflict that has been going on since then between Israeli Jews and Palestinians. And so I think the book I have written that looks at the place of the Jewish religion in Israeli culture comes or is connected to this history of the attempt to create a secular Jewish culture in Israel, in Palestine, in the land of Israel, and how successful this was. And here, one of the things I try to do is to look at cinema, films, and at television programs for about the last 50 years to see how this process of, or to measure the place of the Jewish religion in Israeli culture. Because based on what I've said just now, the attempt by early Zionists to create a secular Hebrew culture, a secular Jewish culture, in fact, one of the ways they did that is by not calling themselves Jews, but calling themselves Hebrews. They talked about themselves not as Jews, but as Hebrews, as a distinction between them and religious Jews. And in this new culture that emerged in Palestine during the first half of the 20th century, before the State of Israel was established, there was a very distinct rejection all of these Jewish character, religious character, and certainly in public life, there was a rejection of all of these religious Jewish values in an attempt to invent a secular Jewish culture that these cultural inventions incorporated language, literature, body language, architecture, music, and art even, and an attempt to create something that would be authentically Hebrew and not connected to Jewish religion. And when the state was established in 1948, the first Prime Minister, Ben-Gurion, also conceptualized a civic religion, as it was called, that is a state culture that will be based very broadly, very vaguely on Jewish history, on Jewish culture generally speaking, but not on religion. And that concept was called, in Hebrew, it's called mamlachtiyut. It is translated in English as statism. And this statism tried to develop some kind of a concept of a civil society that will be based on Jewish values, broadly speaking, but will not be religious. Of course, religion was the attempt was to make religion into a private matter and to separate to some degree what the Americans call church and state. That is to have religion as a personal belief of citizens, of individuals, but not have the state function as a religious authority or a religious entity. Now, when I talked about statism as being informed by Jewish values, for example, as opposed to the day of rest in the Christian world, which is Sunday, the day of rest in the state of Israel, of course, was Saturday, the Sabbath, and the holidays were not Christmas or Easter and other holidays we know from Europe, where the first Zionists came from, but was based on the Jewish calendar. But that was the extent, really, of the Jewishness of the Jewish civic religion, or the Israeli civic religion that developed in Israel. Other than that, the state in its first decades tried to separate itself from traditional religious Jewish culture. But this dynamic changed after the 1967 war with several Arab states, and the war, the 1967 war, or what's called sometimes the 6 Days War, changed things not just in the region politically, but also change the nature of Israeli society, because the Israeli victory brought in its wake a religious awakening. Some people call it sort of a messianic awakening. The military victory was seen by a large number of Israelis as a sign from heaven that God has favored the Jewish people once again. And there was comparison that were made with military victories that are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. There was this eruption of messianism in Israel that led to the rise of what we now know as the settler movement and the settlements in what is referred to as the territories, which is the west bank of the Jordan River, which, of course, the settlers call by their biblical names Judea and Samaria. And following that victory also brought about changes in politics within Israel and a beginning of a shift from labor socialism to religious nationalism, I would say. I think for people outside of Israel who are not very familiar with Israeli politics, perhaps when I say the name of the party, the Likud party, represented this shift, a shift from labor-led governments to Likud-led governments that represented that religiosity, messianism, sort of a return to more traditional Jewish values. And so politically speaking, these were some of the things that were happening. And along this development, we also had the demographic changes in the population of Israel, with the religious sections of the society becoming bigger and bigger. I'm talking primarily about the Orthodox communities, people that when we see them out on the street, they're dressed all in black and they have hats and they have a distinct look to them. And they are religiously considered very, some people call them fundamentalists, but they have various names, but we refer to them generally as religious or Orthodox. And there was a large demographic growth of this community. So we have these changes happening in Israel that are both political and demographic, that have progressively, as Israel matured and came closer to the time we're now, it's the Israeli society started changing from the inside politically and demographically. And these changes also led to changes in the place of the Jewish religion in Israeli culture, from a place of sort of being far away on the margins, a private matter, and something that is not central, to something that is progressively becoming more and more important, central, and an active participant in state life, whereby you cannot really now anymore speak of the statism that I referred to before, or perhaps you can refer to it as a statism that has changed and has incorporated more and more of the older Jewish values, which in the past the initial Zionists wanted to stay away from and wanted to create a culture that was that didn't have so much of these kinds of values. And this is what I was trying to do in the book that I referred to, Directed by God, which I have the book here that looks at these changes that I've just described in detail, that look at them artistically. And I've selected some clips that I asked the host to perhaps play for us that demonstrate these things. I've selected 3 clips, one from the 1970s, one from the year 2000, and one from 2016 or 17. that show you the kind of progression which the religion has made in Israeli culture from the margins to the center. And perhaps, Sapri, you can play the first video clip, and I can say a few words about it after we see it. Let me tell you a few words about this clip. The clip is from a movie that is called Kuni Lemel in I'm sorry?
Kuni Lemel, that's right, yes.
Yeah, Kuni Lemel in Tel Aviv. The clip is from 83, but it's part of a trilogy that began in the 70s, and that's why I said in the 70s. And the film it's a kind of a silly comedy based on mistaken identity. Two twins, one very religious, one very secular, are told by two Jewish twins, Jewish American twins, are told by their grandfather, who's very old and who's about to die, that if they move to Israel and marry a Jewish girl, they will receive, the first one who succeeds to do so will receive $1 million as a reward. And so the film is really a race to go to Israel and to find the girl and to marry her. And what you see in the clip that Sapri will play now is the arrival of the religious twin in the airport in Israel, and he's received by members of the religious seminary, the yeshiva, that he is going to stay with in Israel. So what you saw here is it's a musical. It's the opening to, or not the opening, but it's the first part of the musical. So first of all, I want to say something about the genre. Musicals usually are not very serious films. And so we have to take this into account when we speak about this film. But even if we take into account the fact that this is, to begin with, a silly kind of comedy, the interesting thing for us as researchers, as observers of the culture, is to see how religious people are portrayed about 50 or 50 years ago in Israel, when their place in the culture is not very central and is not very important. So they're presented a little bit as clowns, and they're not very serious. You see, and sort of even stupid. You see this person, he doesn't have luggage. He has a pot that he carries. He has his lunch in his food. He carried his food in the plane because he doesn't understand that airplanes have food on them. He doesn't have to do this. And he's flying on El Al, so they have kosher food, so that's not a problem. But he doesn't know these things, and he's kind of stupid, he's kind of silly, and he's not a very serious person. And the point that I'm trying to make is that about 50 or so years ago, in films like the one we've seen, religious people were portrayed as marginal, as not important, as idiotic, silly, but not threatening, not very scary, because they weren't important. And the culture could afford to refer to them almost as a negligent or a negligible kind of community that is not very important, and making fun of them, really, in this kind of dance that is completely silly and frivolous, and not at all something that is important to contend with. This is one portrayal of the religious that is much older and shows you the insignificant place it had in Israeli culture in the past. But the second clip I want to show you is from from the film that I believe marked the change in the culture's understanding of the importance and the danger of bringing religion into politics, into the center of politics. The film is called Time of Favor. It's a sort of religious thriller that takes place in the territories, in the settler community, and talks about this phenomenon whereby the Israeli army allowed the creation of units that would have religious soldiers that would be able to go to religious school and serve in the army. And the film talks about the conflict of their loyalty between the state and their religious leaders and who they are going to obey at a time of trouble. The film is, I called it a religious thriller because in the film, members of this settler community are trying to implant a bomb under the mosque in Jerusalem and Temple Mount and blow the mosque so they can build the Jerusalem temple. And the film is a race to stop them in the last minute. So here we see, actually, you'll understand it a little better because it's not a clip from the film, but it's a trailer. So it's a little bit clearer. So as you can see, it's very clear from the dialogue, but what is interesting from a historical cultural perspective is that this film, for the first time, talks about this issue in a major feature film that tries to understand the change in the place of religion in the politics and culture of Israel and discuss it publicly. And I think that is the importance of this film. Very, very different from the ridiculous image of comical dancing religious people in the first one. And here, where they are, in fact, have weapons and they are soldiers, and they may be what we call a fifth column. And, for example, one day decide not to obey the military authorities, the civic authorities, but the religious authorities. As you saw those gentlemen, these three gentlemen speaking, they were Israeli secret police, Israeli security forces that are trying to understand and protect the state from these kinds of dangers. And now let's play the last clip from 2017, I believe, 3 years ago. It's a more of an artistic film that looks at religion again from about this time. It's about Orthodox Jewish religion. If you remember the people we saw dancing in the first clip, here they're taken much more seriously, and here they're dealt with more closely. and it's also a trailer. So it's the film deals with the religious doubts that a young member of this Orthodox community has about his place in this religious community, and he doesn't know how to find his place there and be a good religious Jewish person. So please, Sapri, can you play the third clip? The main reason I wanted to use this clip is to show you that religion in contemporary Israeli culture is now very much can be used for high culture. This is an artistic film. It's a little bit. It's not very communicative, and it's not a popular film. But religion is now taken very seriously and is used as a subject for high art and for very sophisticated art, which was, of course, not the case before. But it can be so because it has made a very it has advanced so much into the center of the culture that it can be understood by a great many people and can be referenced and can be talked about in a way that a lot of people understand, and is also a legitimate subject for these considerations, something that it was not. So what I tried, I'm going to wrap up what I was saying up to now and open it up to questions. What I was trying to show you through these three clips is the history of what I spoke about before that, whereby the Jewish society in Israel started out as wanting to separate itself from Judaism and create something new and secular. And the process that happened in the 20th century primarily, where this gradually started to change, religion has become much more part of the Israeli Jewish state culture. And the state of Israel today, politically and culturally, is very, very different from what it was when it first started. And these films can show us from the inside some of these internal changes. And I think with this, I will finish and open it up to questions if there are any. And thank you very much again for allowing me to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Professor Yaron. I have to apologize for you all, and especially to Professor Yaron, because I missed the most important point about Professor Yaron. That's he wrote a book just recently. That's why our meeting today is entitled "Directed by God: Jewishness in the Contemporary Israeli Film and Television." That's the title of the book by Professor Yaron. And I have to give a sense of the title for Indonesian, especially Indonesian audience, because for Indonesian the translation could be diarahkan oleh Tuhan. That's very much religious, but directed by God mean disutradarai oleh Tuhan. I think that's the important point. Directed by God can be mean direction of the path or the road or the street. But the meaning of this title is director, as a director of movie. God become the director of the movie, if I'm not mistaken, right, Professor?
Yeah, absolutely, yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so that's the meaning of the title. Okay, I think important for us to hear from you, and I already shared the title of the movie if you want to pursue further. The first movie is Kuni Lemel de Tel Aviv. Kuni Lemel, I think, is the name of the person. Kuni Lemel in the Tel Aviv.
Then the second one is time of vapor, or in Hebrew is hesder. And then the third one is tikkun. Tikkun, I think the meaning is reparation or perbaikan in Indonesian, atau pemulihan, kind of can be reconciliation, reparation, mending, if there's something broken and try to reconcile. That's the meaning of tikkun in Hebrew. Okay, please, 3 questions. Pak Sapri already mentioned that you need to write it down in the chat box, but since I don't get any question in the chat box, maybe we can allow raise hand, and please, Pak Sapri, pick one, the first question. Oh, there's one question from my friend Alfonso. Professor Peleg mentioned earlier of how the 6 Days War brought changes that implicated a lot of aspects. Did the Yom Kippur War, which happened later, affect those changes as well, or did it only reinforce the changes? Yeah, that's the first question. Do you want to take all the question, or you want to respond one by one?
I can add, since there's no since this is the only question so far, I can start with that. Maybe
please.
This is an excellent question because, of course, the 67 war was just the first trigger, because what happened is that 6 years later, there was an equally important war, the October War, or the Yom Kippur War, which is called in Israeli historiography, and in which the kind of triumph of 67 was reversed, and Israel, at least initially, suffered great losses and managed to win that war at a very, very great cost. And it was that war. It's really the big movement between the great triumph in 67 and the great defeat in 73 is these 2 wars together caused some of the changes that I referred to, because if the 67 war encouraged messianism in Israel, the 73 war undermined the regime, the socialist labor regime that ruled Israel for almost 30 years, and brought about the rise of more right-wing governments. So, because the 73 defeat, the defeat in the 73 war was seen as the responsibility of the labor regime, and because of the doubt in their ability to protect the country and to lead it, they were voted out of office, and the Likud party came into power, and they were much more open to religiosity. They were much more open to the messianism, and they used messianism politically to advance themselves electorally. And that marriage between the nationalism of the Likud party and the religiosity of the settler movement is the combination that has advanced religious forces in Israel and has brought them from margin to center in the way that we have seen in the films. So you're absolutely right. 73 was very important as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there any question? You can ask in Indonesia, boleh bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, and I can try to help you to translate into English. Please. If not, I want to ask.
I think Gilang want to ask questions. Gilang.
Oh yeah, please. Oh, there's a question from Stephanie.
No, from Gilang. From Gilang first.
Then Stephanie, then to Gilang. Yeah. Stephanie, how do you do? I have a question for Australia. What is the biggest obstacles when you make a movie based on religious point of view, and how you can go? Oh, okay. Yeah. Please, Yaron, you want to respond?
What are the biggest obstacles in making? What are the biggest obstacles in making a religious film? Yeah. This is very interesting because here we go a little bit into the politics of making films in Israel. In Israel, because the population is relatively small, films are not really commercially viable. So unlike countries such as Indonesia and other very big countries where you make films and they make money for you, in Israel there aren't enough people to make movies commercially viable. And so most of the movies that are made in Israel are made with public funding. And the government has a budget that it sets aside every year to support the production of films. And what you do in order to make a film in Israel, you need to submit a script to a committee of artists. It's not, I have to say that it's not controlled by politicians. The politicians give the money, but the politicians do not nominate the people on the boards, which rotate. Usually they're artists, movie directors, actors, people from the industry, and these movie boards receive scripts and decide whether to produce them or not. And what happens is that these boards usually elect to support films that deal with what they consider important national issues. This is one reason, for example, that we have very few comedies in Israel, because they're not considered serious enough for state money to be given to. So this is one level. Then we have, of course, an interesting fact we have to consider is that the Orthodox religious community does not officially watch films because they're not allowed religiously to watch films. So most of the films that are made in Israel by these national boards are not made for the consumption of these religious communities, because they do watch them, but not officially. So it's really interesting. And the films that get made are usually films that cater to the majority of the public, not necessarily to these communities. And they reflect, therefore, the attitudes of the culture at large and not necessarily these groups. There are some exceptions to these rules where some very talented religious filmmakers, and I can think of several. For example, Leo, you mentioned Ushpizin is made by one of these people. This is a religious person who is very artistically gifted, and he, for example, produced a film about his own religious community. But when these films get done, films by religious people about very closed religious communities, usually they have to get the permission of religious leaders within the community to make the film. And very often they receive the permission of religious leaders because they see these films as films that present the religious community to the non-religious public in a positive way. And they see this as a bridging kind of medium. And so these are some of the complexities of making religious-based films in Israel. There aren't, I have to say, if you look at the majority of films that are made in Israel, not too many of them are about religion. It's a little bit different with television shows, which in the past decade or so, there has been several shows with very high profile that deal with religious issues. I'm not sure, perhaps this show has been on Netflix now for a while, and it's very, very popular. It's called Shtisel. I don't know if you know this, but it's available around the world through Netflix. And it's about the religious community, Orthodox religious community in Jerusalem, and has been very, very successful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please, Pak Gilang, you want to ask directly? Make it short.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Gilang. I'm a master's student at Oxford University. First of all, I would like to congratulate Professor Yaron for his newly published book and the excellent presentation. I would like to ask regarding, specifically regarding the ultra-Orthodox community or the Haredim. I would like to ask the professor, whether what is the professor assessment on the relationship between the Haredim and the state currently, whether they have been more engaged in politics and have more influence on politics, because by far they have been very much quiet on politics. And if so, what are the rationale? Because there are some literature saying that unlike Muslim or Christian fundamentalists, Jewish fundamentalists tend to isolate themselves and do not want to really impose their values on society. So maybe the professor can give some comments.
Yes, that's again, it's a very complex question. I will try to answer it briefly without, I will say this. The ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, as you have indicated, has traditionally been keeping itself outside of politics, but they have been participating in elections and have been running parties for the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, from the first parliament in 48. What they initially, again, this is also the history of of orthodoxy and politics in Israel, follows the very similar pattern to the one that I have described in my talk, because they started from a very isolationist position. They agreed to be part of coalition governments, but only to the extent that they want to get government funding for their religious initiatives. For example, one of the paradoxes of the participation of religious people in Israeli politics is that when they are part of governments, coalition governments, and are offered ministerial positions, they don't agree to be called a minister because they don't recognize the state of Israel. So they're called under minister, under secretary. It's kind of a Talmudic, a sophistry that is a bit strange to people from the outside. However, what has happened over the years is a constant process of what sociologists have called Israelization of those communities. That is, these Orthodox communities are incorporating into their religious culture more and more statist cultural elements that in the past they didn't touch and they didn't want to be part of. They are becoming more integrated into the workforce. They become more integrated into the cultural activities of the country, as you have seen in these films that I have shown. And they are becoming more opinionated in political terms, for example, with respect to political decisions that have to do with the conflicts with the Palestinians. So there has been a process of them that community absorbing more of the national non-religious elements of the state into their own behavior and communities, but at the same time, by demanding that the state behaves more aligned more with their religious beliefs, they're causing also a counter kind of change within state culture. So it's a reciprocal and porous kind of relationship. What are you studying at Oxford? What's your degree in?
I'm doing an MPhil on modern Middle Eastern studies, but focusing on Israeli-Palestinian issues.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I think I can add a little bit. I met Dov Lipman 2 years ago in Bet Shemesh. That's the politicians coming from Haredi community. Then we can see a person like Dov Lipman is become the middleman between those worlds, because the world is so different. Then Dov Lipman become the person that can talk to the government and at the same time can give religious precepts to justify the inclusion of those community with a larger political landscape. Okay, we have 3 other questions. I had to limit to 3 questions. and then we have to finish our discussion, or except depends on Professor Yaron, you want to add a little bit time for that. But we have three more questions, then hopefully it can be, we can wrap up afterward. So from Nirmala, Ibu Tri Nirmala, my question is, making a film with a religious background is certainly a lot of challenges, and usually the film is not popular. I think it's already responded by Professor Yaron through the question by Stephanie as well. So I move to Mr. Husada. Is there any change in Judaism attitude toward making movie? As far as I know, just as some of Islamic groups, Judaism also has groups that have contra view. I think it's also, yeah, right, it's already responded through the question by Pak Gilang about the Haredi. You want to add, please?
I would just want to add one thing about this. Is really interesting because I mentioned some of the prohibitions against watching television, etc., before. One of the interesting phenomenon that has happened in Israel in relationship to this is the development of Orthodox cinema for the consumption of Orthodox audiences that is divided along gender lines. Men making films with men about masculine issues to a masculine audience, and women making films with female actors only for female audiences, and they don't watch it commercially. They watch it in, in empty classrooms after schools, just for themselves. These are not from a cinematic perspective. They're not particularly slick. They're not particularly good, but they provide a really interesting artistic outlet for these communities that are created in-house. These have been really interesting phenomena that has happened in Israel in the last 20 or so years.
Okay, thank you. One question is about Israeli movie Fauda. I'm not familiar with that Fauda. It's in that list. Do you want to comment something about Fauda? It's coming from Luis.
Yes, Fauda is a TV series that is also very, very popular on Netflix, and that focuses on the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And again, one of the things that Israel has been exporting culturally to the world is the Arab-Israeli conflict. That has been one, if you look at the most successful films coming out of Israel and television programs coming out of Israel, religion is one of the latest additions to the popularity of Israeli culture on worldwide streaming platforms. But the Arab-Israeli conflict has been responsible to a number of popular films and television programs around the world, and Fauda is the latest and the most successful to date. Again, it is sort of a cultural export from Israel that focuses on something that is a very serious and very it's a huge problem that doesn't go away, that is leveraged. Perhaps it's cynical to say, but it's leveraged culturally into a product that is very widely consumed. Perhaps some of the popularity of it is relates to the fact that it is very well known in the world. So, for example, if an Indonesian filmmaker were to make a film about ethnic tension in Indonesia, it may not be so successful around the world because not so many people outside of Indonesia know about these issues. But the Arab-Israeli conflict is a conflict that has been going on now for 100 years and is very, very well known around the world. And that's probably one of the reasons for it.
Thank you very much. I think I want to take my privilege as the host to ask one question, because all the three movies you mentioned is mostly Ashkenazic, let's say European American, or let's say white Jews. Is there any Mizrahi? Because in your book you mentioned about three strands: Ashkenazic, Mizrahi, and national. And maybe you can say a little bit about that so we understand beyond the Ashkenazic representation.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I actually wasn't, when I was thinking about the third clip, I was thinking about a clip that may show what I'm about to say, that I was talking about different developments that go in different ways, politics, orthodoxy, nationalism, and the different routes or different strands that they express in Israeli culture. One of the identities in Israel that manages to combine many of these together is the Mizrahi Jewish identity. By Mizrahi, I mean Jews who came to Israel from the Middle East, from Islamic Muslim countries, from Iran, from Iraq, from Morocco, Egypt, etc., and have been marginalized politically and culturally until about the rise of the Likud, where it was thanks to the support of these voters that the labor coalitions were defeated, and the Likud has been sustained by these voters since that time. And the Mizrahi community in Israel, which really is a very amorphous and open kind of identity, has managed to incorporate Jewish religiosity, Zionism, nationalism in ways that other communities have not managed to do very successfully. And perhaps this is one of the most interesting and cutting edge and emerging Israeli identities that incorporates all of these strands together in a way that is very distinctly Israeli today. And that is perhaps a good point to end with, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're supposed to give applause to Professor Yaron. Maybe we can make a virtual applause to Professor Yaron for the very fine presentation. And thank you very much. And hopefully, because I just read about the further aspiration to continue this discussion, maybe Pak Sapri and Pak Saleh, hopefully next time we can have a screening movie together, a religious movie together coming from different countries, including Israel. So I think it's a good suggestion when we can consider, and I turn it to Pak Sapri to consider for our next meeting to have more engaging with the more countries and also Israel cultural representation. And thank you very much, Professor Yaron. And hopefully we are not stopped here to continue discussion. And again, I offer you to coming to our country, our beautiful country after the pandemic, the post-pandemic meeting. Hopefully we can make a more face-to-face engagement in Jakarta, in my hometown, Jogyakarta. Okay,
I plan on doing so. Compliments of Sapri, and would be very, very happy to do so. And thank you very much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. I return to Pak Sapri.
All right, thank you very much for everybody. Special thanks for you, Professor Yaron. It's such a wonderful day, very nice discussion. It's very alive and everybody excited. I do thank you a lot, Mr. Professors, and also Leo and friends, Gilang, who's doing his study and he make a break and attending the meeting, and many friends I couldn't mention their names, so thank you very much. Definitely we should do that one more time. And before we end it, I would like to unmute everybody here. Okay, could you please unmute everybody? Okay, so we give applause to Professor Yaron, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.